Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Regi Taylor, sitting in today for Al McFarlane. Before we get started, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. And if you haven't already, I'd like to invite you to become a subscriber to the conversation with Al McFarlane. Um, the conversation is 25 years in, and in the words of Al himself, has fulfilled its mission to inform, instruct, and inspire. The conversation is not simply a discussion between the host and the guests of the show. It is actually an invitation to engage the community to join the conversation. We'd like you to engage and share that information with your family, friends, and your social media circle. You are the only reason that we're here. We want to discuss today's hot topic. Today's hot topic is regarding chronic illnesses. The state legislator in Minnesota has addressed an issue of a loophole in the Affordable Care Act that makes it difficult for some people to have what President Obama intended, which were certain illnesses to be addressed that were previous illnesses. And Mr. Hussein, an assemblyman in this Minnesota State Legislature, has worked with the Mayo Clinic to fulfill that loophole and make sure there's not only addressed but funded. That's our hot topic today. So we'll be discussing that. We also would like to invite our distinguished guest for today's conversation. We have today Mr. William Spivey, a writer, a prolific writer, as a matter of fact, on politics, history, education, and race, who is also a distinguished artist and social critic. We'd like to welcome Mr. Spivey, and we also have Mr. Edwin Avent. He is the president and CEO of the Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys. And Mr. Avent also has a remarkable career in communications. He was the president and CEO of the and publisher of Heart and Soul magazine, and has had exceptional achievements in public relations, marketing, advertising, and sales, and also as a philanthropist and a nonprofit administrator. And he still has time to brush his teeth and shower. He's a very busy man. So we'd like to invite you today. Um, Today's special topic is a Black History Month special. It's a special feature that we'll be discussing regarding coming up with or implementing a strategy to address transformative educational um, interventions on behalf of our male youth. Our male youth are struggling. We have a series of categories of statistics to share that will give you a sense of just how dire that situation is. We'll be discussing the areas of incarceration, illiteracy, poverty, the murder rate, addiction, disease, and mortality, and acute childhood experiences. So join us for the conversation. Let me introduce our guest, Mr. William Spivey. Would you like to introduce yourself to our viewers who have joined in the conversation today?
Well, thank you. My name is William Spivey. Most
Spivey, I'm
everybody else is
sorry.
Spivey. I'm Spivey.
Spivey.
Uh, I grew up in Minneapolis, and I'm so glad to be, talking to people from home. So I really appreciate that. I grew up grew up first on the north side, then on the south side. I went to Marshall U High, which doesn't exist anymore. But I'm just glad to be here.
Thank you. We welcome you. And Mr. Edwin Avent, please introduce yourself to our viewers who are participating in our conversation today.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for having me today. Once again, my name is Edwin Avent, and I am the president and CEO of the Five Smooth Stones Foundation. And our organization is the operator of a charter school in Baltimore known as the Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys. So we're educating boys from fourth grade through eighth grade, trying to get them all prepared so they can make it into the most competitive high schools in the city and in the country, because our boys do leave, go to boarding schools and things like that. And our goal is to get them to graduate high school in 4 years and head off to college. And so we were founded in 2015, and here we are in 2023, and still moving along and really touching the lives of young African American men. As you shared, my prior career has always been in the media industry. And so for many years, as you said, the publisher of Heart and Soul magazine, we launched a regional television network called the Soul of the South Television Network. and just many other things in the media industry. But my passion has always been uplifting African American men and boys, and that has led me to help launch this school and now be the CEO.
Mr. Avent, there's one thing that I read when I was reviewing your history with the Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys, and it was an interesting reference. Even though your school offers services to young men in the 4th through 8th grades, I noticed that your mission talked about the graduation date for those 4th through 8th graders far off into the future. So as far as your mission is concerned, you don't believe that your mission is complete until students who have come through your program have actually graduated and obtained a college degree. Is that correct?
That is correct, actually. So I guess if I got a 8th grader now, he'll be graduating in 4 years. That'll be 27. So he would be in the class of 2031. So we tell our young men, that their graduation date is the year that they've graduated from college 4 years after they graduated from high school. So that's the expectation. And so we set that expectation up in every one of our young men's mind. So when they introduce themselves, they're always telling you the year that they're graduating from college.
Excellent. I appreciate that, Mr. Avent. The first category that we want to talk about is incarceration. Young men of color and Black men, period, are being incarcerated in numbers far outweighing our proportion of the general population. And it's something that if we don't input a transformative intervention into their education to prepare them, to make them literate, which is one of the critical issues that is the most critical issue facing their education, because it affects every other area of their ability to learn academically. I'd like to ask both of you gentlemen, what could be a remedy to push back on the rate of incarceration of our young people and give them a chance to be able to become academically proficient and go out into the world as productive citizens? I'm going to ask you, Mr. Avent, because of your role with the Baltimore Collegiate School, what could you offer? What are you offering right now to your students that might be able to help them to navigate past the I don't know what to call it. It's a scandal, actually, of the level of incarceration that our young people are facing. What are you offering at Baltimore Collegiate School to help that?
Well, one of the things that is like commonly known, or lots of people know this, is that most of these young men that are being incarcerated or caught up in the life of the drug trade or actually being murdered in our streets, one of the things that they have in common overwhelmingly is like 85% of them can't read above a 4th grade level. And so illiteracy is still very prominent in our community. You would think that wouldn't be the case in 2023. However, it is. And the pandemic didn't do anything to help our situation. As a matter of fact, it really hurt our situation. But the thing that I think is most important is if we can lift up our African-American young men and get them to at least their on grade reading level and keep them there and keep them moving along their path, most of them will graduate from high school in the 90% rate within 4 years of graduating from the 8th grade. So that's something that we really focus on. As soon as we get boys, we test them and we go to work on helping them learn how to read, helping them to catch up, and getting them on grade level. And then one of the things we do to try and help this literacy rate is we teach literacy across all of our curriculum. So say if we're focused on a topic around history, we will have that historical topic flow through science, social studies, English, and math. And so we try to tie those things around each one of those subjects. So it's working on the same vocabulary, some of the same themes, things like that help to reinforce what we're trying to teach them, but it's always having literacy working on literacy in every one of the classes. And so getting started really young, as soon as we get our boys, and getting to work on reading with them is super important. Before our boys even start school with us, we have a summer school. So we start in the 4th grade. If we've accepted these 3rd graders coming into our school, we expect them to be with us mostly all summer long as we're getting them prepared for the 4th grade. And so we get to work on some of that remediation of their reading right away.
Excellent. We appreciate that. And Mr. Spivey, I apologize for butchering your name today.
That's
But
okay.
I've read some of your writings. I've perused some of your writings. You're a prolific writer. Your arguments, your outlooks are tremendous across a variety of topics. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say on the topic and to share with our viewers.
Yes. First, I'm a bit of a history buff, and mass incarceration isn't new. It didn't start with a crime bill in the 70s. Immediately after enslavement ended, after the Civil War, we were given the black codes, and part of the reason for that was to force people back to the very same plantations in some cases that they were working on before they were freed. And after the black codes came Jim Crow, and we've always had mass incarceration, mostly to control a workforce that they couldn't control. The reasons might be a little bit different now, is that as we get to a point where I think in 2045, we're expected to have white people become a minority population as opposed to being the majority. They're taking all the steps they can to maintain control, and that includes voter suppression. And I think voting is as much of the reason to keep with the mass incarceration as any other reason at this point. And you ask how to change things. The only way that it can be changed is through legislation, because many of the things that lead to mass incarceration are because of legislation. For example, the penalty for crack cocaine versus powdered cocaine was at one time 100 to 1. And as crack cocaine was generally more available in the black community. And the Congress is very proud of themselves for having lowered that differential from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. But there's still an 18 to 1 difference in terms of sentencing guidelines and sentencing rates. So black people are spending a lot of time in more time for the same thing, basically, in jails and prisons.
I appreciate your input. I just want to share my own insight. I've been an editorial writer for the Baltimore Times, and I recall a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago about that alluded to both of Nixon and Reagan's war on drugs, and how it was actually a pretext to just mass arrest people in the inner city. Mm-hmm. And I talked about how the imprisonment rate, the incarceration rate of our young people going into prisons is basically a breeding ground. It's a training ground, because there's a revolving door between the prison and the street, and that prison culture is infiltrating the street culture. And as a result of that, you have young people being incarcerated with, as Mr. Avent pointed out, who are illiterate, and now they return to the street. They got 2 strikes. They were illiterate, and they have charges on their record, sometimes a felony. And now what do? How do you make a living now on the urban streets? And so the drug sales is now an industry where people can otherwise not find any other way to make a living. And so now they are easy pickings to be able to be arrested for drug use and for drug distribution. So that's another reason for mass incarceration that I believe is just a concoction. Moving along, and actually that segues right into the next subject that we've already touched on, and that is the subject of literacy. I have a couple of stats that I want to share, and then I'd like to have your input. In 2019, only 18% of 4th graders were proficient in reading. In 2019, only 15% of 8th graders were proficient in reading. And in 2019, only 17% of 12th graders, these are all black kids exclusively, were proficient in reading. Overall, black student proficiency in math in 2021 was 18%. Okay, so again, we go to the heart of our subject, which is how do we intervene in a way that is transformative to address these issues now? Because these young people are expected to inherit our community in just a short number of years. And not only are they ill prepared to fend for themselves to make an honest living, but also they're going to be inheriting the same ills that our generation is attempting to address now, and they are woefully ill prepared to do that. So what can we do quickly in the area of literacy / illiteracy to be able to improve the lot of our young people quickly? Mr. Spivey, would you address that for us?
Okay, and I wish that I had an answer. I've been thinking about that for years and haven't really come up with a good one. One of the things, and we talked about the school to prison pipeline, is that a lot of our students are being taken out of our schools or taken into alternative schools for those people, the troubled kids, and don't have the opportunity to stay on track with their peers. And when you look at reading, we don't have people that care to the same quality about our kids like we would necessarily care about our kids. And, I wanted to really talk about, secondary and education and college educations, that a lot of cases that we have schools that, don't really care about our students, and we need to be able to be in a position to where we can pressure those schools to care about our kids. And we've got a situation right now where politically, you've got people like Ron DeSantis in Florida and other governors like in Texas that are using, Black kids as a method of reaching their bases by keeping them from learning about, themselves and finding things that interest them as far as being educated.
That's a very, very good point. Well, let me just add also that, my journalism career started in high school. In my senior year as a editor-in-chief of my high school paper. And one of the very first editorials that I wrote about, this is some time ago, was on the subject of social promotion. And for those who might not be aware of that policy, social promotion is a policy of advancing kids from grade to grade, despite their lack of proficiency in basic reading and math. The criteria was, if you behave yourself and you come to school with any type of regularity, we will advance you to the next grade. And unfortunately, during the George Bush II administration, he had a policy called No Child Left Behind, which basically exacerbated that policy. The No Child Left Behind, the idea that young people would be stigmatized if they were left behind in a grade. So it continued the policy where if you're not a behavioral problem and you come to school with any type of regularity, we'll advance you. And then you have young people who matriculate from high school, they go on to college, and then they face the reality that that type of policy does not exist there. And now they actually have to follow rigorous academic standards, and they have to go through remediation just to make it. And many are not even making it through the first year. Mr. Avent, what's your insight on that?
Well, I think, you touch on some really good points. I quite often am reading resumes because we're always hiring people. We're hiring people for teachers. We're hiring people for administrative positions. And I'm always quite surprised when I'm reading resumes or cover letters from people in college. And so we do have an issue around like writing, reading, literacy. Even our young people who are graduating from high school, we really have to take it up a whole nother level prior to them making it to high school. And so those are the things like we try to really emphasize in our school. And I really believe that, really focusing on, just the basics of reading and writing at the most basic levels is something that is so incredibly important, because like, as I said, all of these, you're going to need to, know how to read, write, and perform across all the different curriculums. And unfortunately, in many urban areas, and particularly dealing with our children, we're not as proficient. And those numbers that you brought up, the teens in proficiency in reading and math, are very real. And largely because they're coming from homes, our children are coming from homes where people did not do well in school themselves. So quite often their parents are having a challenging time with helping their children to read or to do math. Quite often the parents themselves could benefit from going back to school and improving in their own literacy rate. So we as a community have a widespread problem with regards to literacy, and progressing. So when I think about transformative education, one of the reasons why we started Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys is because we were mentoring in different schools in Baltimore City, and we saw that what was lacking. We saw there was a lack of discipline, control. Boys needed to learn differently than girls. In our opinion, if we could isolate them away and get them to focus on their grades, that we think we could make a difference. And so therefore we launched our school in 2015 with that very notion. And so in an ideal world, we'd be opening more of these schools. That would be my goal, to open 10, 20, 30 more schools like this, particularly in urban areas where we can grasp as many of our particularly young men, and get them into an environment where we can set high expectations for them and intense one-on-one tutoring for them, things that would help to improve their grades, and help improve their literacy ability. And I think we'll see a real transformation in our communities. Now, the challenge is, and like what we're dealing with right now in Baltimore, is that when you do things, you can start these schools like charter schools in your city, but it depends on what jurisdiction you're in, because some jurisdictions are not charter friendly. And right now we are ourselves in a battle with Baltimore City Public Schools as it's time for our renewal, and we're seeking a 3 to 5 year renewal. But we've been told that there's a possibility that we might get a vote of non-renewal, at least a recommendation for non-renewal. Many in our community believe that part of the problem is it could be envy, in that our boys are actually graduating from our school in the 8th grade and then graduating from high school in 4 years at the 90 to 95% rate. So they're sticking through, they're persisting through, and then they're applying to college. Almost half of our boys that are graduating from high school on time are actually going to college after they finish. And so some believe that Baltimore City says, because our numbers aren't that good, our graduation rates are around 64%, you guys are showing us up and maybe we should just eliminate you. And so that's a major problem in urban America. There's a lot of school closures going on, but quite often these school closures are impacting the most vulnerable people. And it's also impacting the organizations that are typically started by African Americans. Our organization is African American. African Americans started the organization, African Americans managed the organization. And so we're being targeted, we believe, because people believe we're vulnerable to be taken out, and they need our money, they need our students, because overall population is shrinking. And so, if we can survive this and then multiply this, I think that's one of the transformative things we can do, is open up more schools targeting our boys and giving them more attention to help them reach their goals.
Thank you, Mr. Avent. Let me just share something with everyone on this conversation today. I was actually one of those kids. I was actually, in my formative years in school, actually was a prolific reader. My parents read, two-parent family. They were both readers. They both read to us, and I could read very well, but I pretended that I couldn't, because most of my friends, some of whom were big knuckleheads, they didn't appreciate that. That was antithetical to being cool. So I pretended I didn't know it any more than they knew. And after I got expelled from school and had to beg my way back in school, I realized that I wasn't going to the NBA. I wasn't going to the NFL. And I had to figure out, how can I feed myself legally? And in the 18 months that I was expelled, before I begged my way back in, I read everything I could get my hands on. And then when I did return to school, I had a brand new attitude, because I learned a valuable lesson about what it would require for me to make a living, have a family, and support a family. Mm-hmm. And when I became the editor of the high school newspaper and became an academic star in school, I got chastised by most of my former buddies. It was like, buddy, you're talking white. What's up? And that is a problem. That is a problem with illiteracy because we're actually getting pushback from the young people that we're trying to help because they view speaking standard English as speaking white. And that is a problem because they're sabotaging their own success by not wanting to learn their own language. And, we have a situation right now where a lot of our call center jobs are being shipped off to the Philippines and South America and other parts of the world because our own young people, black and white, cannot articulate their own native language sufficiently enough to be able to speak in a way that allows them to conduct a business transaction over the telephone. So part of what we have to battle back, push back on with our young people is we have to change the culture that allows them to believe that speaking their own language proficiently is tantamount to being white. So we have to push back on that as well. We have to be able
do
to,
that.
that's part of that transformative process. Yeah,
Yeah,
Mr. Evans?
that's part of what we do at our school. And when people are like, what are you doing differently? And I think those type of things are the things that we're really focused on. We're focused on the soft skills, teaching boys how to shake a hand, make a good eye contact, pull your pants up, wear a belt, a tie, and everything like that. But also letting them know that being smart is actually cool and rewarding those boys who actually talk white or whatever they might say, because they're actually performing. And it's always amazing. Some of the guys that you think are the most disruptive boys, who you think don't care, actually get excited when it's time for honors awards, when we're giving out the boys who made the honor roll, the high honors, boys who are most proficient in math, or you'd be surprised by the boys who get upset if they don't get an award. Right. And we kind of use those awards programs to try and motivate the other guys. But and they know who we keep giving the awards to. And it may be the boys who speak like white people or whatever. It's just because we want them to understand what good looks like and what it sounds like, and how when they go out into this world to interact with other people, how they need to be perceived and how they need to present themselves. And so that's one of the other good things that we have about running our own school. We get to work on those type of things.
That's excellent. Did you want to weigh in again, Mr. Spivey?
Yeah, Reggie, I experienced some of the same things that you did in school. Not so much in elementary school, where I participated in the spelling bee and I finished first and second in my school for 2 consecutive years. But when I got to the high school, I had an aptitude for math, and my fellow students, resented the fact that I was doing so well. I went in 4 semesters. I went from A+ to A to A- to B+, just to be able to get along with my peers. Not speaking up in class. And by the time I got to be a junior, I participated in the I took the PSAT and finished as a national merit semifinalist, which shocked everybody, including my teachers, because they didn't know I had that in me because I'd been suppressing it to get along with my friends.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, so we understand that in order to transform our young people in the area of literacy, that we have to push back on the culture that says that being smart is uncool. Right. I appreciate your input, Jim. We're going to move right on. The next category we're going to talk about is the murder. We're going to talk about murder. I have a very dire statistic I want to share that just last year, 2022, Black boys were killed by firearms more than any other group, which probably would not surprise you. Also, I have a second statistic that says that murder victimization is the leading cause of death for Black juveniles and younger children. The leading cause. And I would relate that to part of what we talked about earlier when we talked about how the drug trade is actually an industry in the poorest, most destitute areas of our inner cities, because that's the economy that's available to them. And as a result of that, you had drug wars within our communities, and everybody wants a turf, everybody wants a piece of the action. And so that is driving up the murder rate. It's not just wanton killing, right. It's the fact that the drug trade is so prevalent in our communities and there's fierce competition for who's going to be top dog and who's going to make all the money. So I'd like you gentlemen to address the issue of murder. What do we do? How can we use education to transform our young people's thinking about the sanctity of human life and the idea of killing, which it's a twofer in every instance, at least a twofer, because you have a young person that's dead and you have a young person that's going to prison for a very long time.
Right.
And
Right.
you have people on Capitol Hill and you have people in other parts of the government that is cheering us on. You have the MAGA crowd that's there cheering us on. You go, guys.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me, gentlemen. Edwin, how do you address that at Baltimore Collegiate School for Boys?
One of the good things that we get to do with our boys every day is they have to recite our motto. They have to recite our creed. And our motto is, whatever hurts my brother hurts me, and whatever helps my brother helps me. Right. And we have them say this is several times a day. It's posted throughout our school, but we try to get that into their psyche early on, to think that, whatever is happening with my brother is going to impact me, and really teaching them that mentality around being my brother's keeper. And we get to re-emphasize that all the time. And it's whether it's on our athletic wear, whether it's in up on the wall in the gym. They get to see this over and over. And I liken it to Boy Scouts, right? I was a Boy Scout. My sons are Boy Scouts. My oldest is an Eagle Scout. But one of the things they did every week is the Scout law and the Scout motto. And it just tells them over, you're going to be thrifty, kind, courteous, clean, reverent. And if you say this all the time, trustworthy, I believe that repeating these mantras in their head helps them begin to believe that I am more valuable, that my brother is more valuable. So we begin there with some of that kind of social programming. But then we have actual classes on mediation, where we're teaching our boys to be mediators, so that even in school, when they're having challenges with each other, we're now training up young men to help mediate the disputes and learn the language of mediation, so that they themselves will know how to use that when they encounter situations in the streets. So we're doing our best to change their values and their psyche about how they think about themselves and each other. But then we're also trying to help them get the language that they can use in their interactions with others that might help to de-escalate situations. Quite often, we find out that we have a lot of angry boys. There's a lot of children of trauma in our school. Lots of our boys, I could go into any classroom and ask the boys, do you know anybody in your family or friend circle that's been murdered in the last 2 years? And half the class will raise their hand. They actually knew somebody. For some of them, it's a family member, direct family member, whether it's their father or their brothers or an uncle or a cousin that they were close to. So there's a lot of trauma going on in our school. So one of the other things that we have is social workers in our school, therapists in our school, so that we can help our boys deal with and cope with these issues. Small groups where boys come in there and talk about their issues. So we're trying to get them to understand the language, to repeat mantras of support and loving each other, and just really trying to, let them know what the consequences are, when it comes to taking another person's life, whether you end that person's life, destroy their families, or destroy your own life.
I'd like to add to that in every aspect of our culture and our society, there's a hierarchy. And whether that be a drug dealer or a pimp, or sometimes in the church, you have the church leadership, or in the education system, the principals and the teachers. And people in anywhere where they fall will try to aspire to become higher up in whatever hierarchy they think they can make it. And I forgot to mention pro sports. But everybody's not going to be able to be a professional athlete. And while a lot of people might start out with that dream, especially young boys, they may come soon to realize that that's not going to be it for them. So they look for another area in which they can compete. And far too often, the alternative they come up with is in the drug culture, where murder is a certain aspect of it, and that what education can do is let them know that there's alternatives, that there's other things that they can do in which they can achieve success and not fall into the game where murder is such an important aspect of survival in that particular group.
That's awesome, Mr. Spivey. Thank you for your input on that. I think that we're making some headway in sharing with the viewers issues that our young people face that we're all aware of, but they're not necessarily top of mind where they need to be. Because the only way that we will really make a difference, the only way we'll really be able to find a remedy for a lot of these issues, is to make it top of mind and allow the rest of our community to understand that the fate of we as African Americans hangs in the balance of how well our young people are prepared to inherit the circumstances that we're battling right now that we're not winning.
Mm-hmm.
So let me move it along to talk about addiction. There's some interesting statistics about addiction, all types of addiction, not just drug addiction. For instance, I have a statistic that's particular to Baltimore. A Johns Hopkins study found that Black neighborhoods in Baltimore are 8 times more likely to have liquor stores than white neighborhoods. 8 times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That in 2020, the Black population death rates involving synthetic opioids increased by 818%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Those are just a couple of statistics. But again, we talk about it sometimes in the abstract, but on the ground in our communities, these are realities that our young people are dealing with, that their families, their neighbors, their friends, and their larger community deal with every day. They're not just abstract statistics, pontificated about on the evening news. This is a reality. Mr. Spivey, what's your thoughts on how to push back on addiction and the temptation of young people to experiment with drugs? I mean, many of us have, but not to the extent that it becomes our life, it overwhelms and dominates our lifestyle and causes us to become addicted and stray from the path of becoming a productive adult citizen.
In my opinion, addiction is tied to poverty. And if I'm going to back up for a second, is that poverty didn't just happen. It didn't happen. It doesn't happen to Black people at a higher percentage because of a lack of work ethic or lack of opportunity. That it goes back to when, at one point in time, the ratio of the rich people to poor people was even worse than it is now. You had a very low percentage of rich people, say 4 or 5%, and almost everybody else was poor. There was no middle class. And what is given credit for developing the middle class in a lot of cases is the VA home loan program for veterans coming back from World War II primarily, and the FHA program, which started just before the end of World War I, to allow people to get into homes. But both of those programs Black people were excluded from it, almost 100%. So the middle class was developed, but Black people were left out. Now, getting into everyone wants to be successful, to have money, to do well. And one of those opportunities was drugs. And the drug dealers found that to expand their marketplace, they needed to get more people addicted to drugs. So they gave them away. And we won't even get into the CIA and what they may or may not have done with crack in the introduction to that. But addiction didn't just happen, that it was part of a marketing program to allow some people to earn more money. And unfortunately, that hasn't changed. And that part of what people are, what happens in our inner cities is that the drug use and the drug culture expands in order to keep the profitability up.
Absolutely. That is absolutely a fact. And the evidence is clear. Mr. Avent, would you please weigh in for us?
Well, I think that Mr. Spivey made a lot of great points with regards to addiction. I think that and addiction is spreading, right? It's it starts off with the drugs and alcohol, but for real, when we look at the pathologies in the Black community and the things that are impacting our health and well-being, we have several other addictions. One to food, sugar. things like that that are poisoning our people because they're addicted to it. And so it causes obesity, which leads to these other problems like diabetes, heart disease, and other things that are negatively impacting our community. And now you got stuff like gambling, and where everybody can bet on every game now. And so once again, what does that do? If people gamble and at every corner or on their phone, that's depleting their financial resources. So addiction in our community is having devastating impact in a lot of different areas, but particularly when it comes to narcotics and drugs and stuff like that, those things we go back, like you said, the CIA's involvement and everything like that. COINTELPRO, where you're looking to destroy the Black community from the inside out. I think addiction has been one of those ways of undermining our community, destabilizing our families, and hitting the most vulnerable of our community. And so it is a real challenge to help our community through these issues. Once again, I always kind of go back to when you are well educated, when you have purpose in life, you have a little less time to allow yourself to sink into the traps of addiction. Because if you got to go to work and you got to perform, people tend to not consume as much drugs or alcohol because they have to go make a living and take care of their family. So for me, it always kind of goes back to education. And the more that we know, the better educated we are, the less likely we are to abuse certain substances.
These are excellent points, gentlemen. I really do appreciate your weighing in. And I just want to acknowledge we have some of our viewers are actually weighing in, enjoying the conversation. We have Char Willie of Witty News and Michelle Madison, who are out there among other viewers who are engaging the conversation, which is just what we like to happen. That's what the conversation is, more for them than for us. We're just facilitators. So we appreciate you. We have Mike V. Mike thinks that rebuilding our libraries in Black neighborhoods as social infrastructure would be impactful to Black boys to develop themselves as knowledge bases. Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent point. I think that's a place we really don't have those types of places. We have internet cafes, which don't probably work very well culturally for our young people. And to have a place like a neighborhood community library where they can go and congregate, like-minded people, like-minded young people can go and share and support each other and learn together. I think that's an excellent resource. We appreciate that comment. Yep. I want to move on and talk about something that really doesn't get talked about a lot. I've written on the topic several times. I've written on it lately, and that is the subject of ACEs, which is acute childhood experiences. Acute childhood experiences is defined as a trauma that our young kids experience, similar to a domestic version of PTSD, if you will, of post-traumatic stress disorder. And ACEs affects our kids because it actually becomes, the trauma becomes so overwhelming that it affects their ability to learn. It affects their ability to excuse me? Hello?
Mm-hmm.
Did someone have a comment?
Not me.
Okay. No. We just want to shout out the viewers, first of all, who participate. We really appreciate you. But as I said, the acute childhood experiences actually can impact children in ways that cause them to become juvenile delinquent, that cause them to become essentially dysfunctional as they grow into adulthood in terms of their ability to be gainfully employed, in terms of their participation in gang activity and other types of antisocial behavior. Are you gentlemen familiar with ACEs? And if so, Mr. Avent, would you please weigh in and share your insights on that as it affects your educating the students under your tutelage?
You'd be surprised at the number of young men that sometimes when I sit down with them, they're acting out, they've been fighting, they're angry, and sometimes these boys are 9 years old, 11 years old, and they're angry, right? And you watch sometime you break up a fight, and this little boy was fighting with incredible ferocity and just like really punching another kid, and you're like, hey, and then you sit down, and after a while they calm down. You're talking to them like, so what's going on? What's really bothering you? You know, have you talked to your dad about that? And then that's when you'll find out, like, I don't know him. I don't know that man. You know, that I'll never see that man. You know, and you start to see this anger, and quite often, what I'm finding is happening is that the trauma of boys not seeing their fathers, being in their fathers being involved in their lives. It's been more than once that I encounter young men that a source of their anger and why they're acting out is the trauma of being separated from their father, not being able to visit with them, whether it's because they're incarcerated or losing their father because to the streets because of murder or whatever, or just a bad relationship between the parents where the mother is keeping the father away from the son. A lot of these are early childhood experiences that are, impacting these children and causing them to act out. And they carry it with them for years, because you could talk to the same young boy 6 years later, and they still have these issues around the impact of their father. And it's that is something that I have noticed a lot. I'm not saying that touches on every area, but it certainly is something that stands out of some of those early childhood experiences that are traumatizing to young people and that they're dealing with. And quite often they're not being given therapy. They're not being taken to a social worker or a therapist to talk about these issues. Sometimes they're being overly medicated because people misdiagnose what is probably this anger with ADD or something like that. And so they're they're medicating children. So it's a variety of ways children are they're being impacted.
Oh, that's excellent. That's an excellent point that you're making, Mr. Avent. Mr. Spivey.
Yes, I don't have any direct experience with it, and I don't spend a lot of time in the company of children these days, with the exception of my grandchildren. And I've got 3 kids and 3 different sets of grandkids. Now, my oldest girl runs a school in Atlanta, a private school, and I can safely say that they've pretty much separated themselves from the majority of the things that you might see happen in the public schools. And that school, the kids that come out of there do tremendously. Over 90% of them end up going to college, many of them on scholarship, and they take a trip every summer to some foreign country. They've been to China, Rome, England, Egypt, London, and various other places. And I think that I can see the benefit of them being removed from an environment where more of that takes place. Another one of my daughters, my son and daughter-in-law, they homeschool. They have 3 kids now, but one's very, very young still. But those kids they're doing outstanding academically, although they're going to be reentering the system in middle school next year. One of them, and so that's going to be a unique change. And my other daughter has 2 girls that are in the public school system, and it seems like they are experiencing more types of trauma between their friends and sometimes family members in the extended family than you see the others. So from that, all I can gather is to do your best to put your kids in a safer environment. Not that there is anything that's ultimately safe, but to try to put them in a better environment where they can be removed from as much trauma as possible and not be the cause of that trauma yourself.
Absolutely. As we move off that topic, I just want to share a couple of really glaring statistics related to acute childhood experiences. According to the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the CDC, ACEs increases the risk of chronic diseases and behavioral challenges, including obesity, autoimmune disease, diabetes, heart disease, poor mental health, alcoholism, and even a reduced life expectancy by as much as 20 years. It also increases risks of injury, sexually transmitted infections, teen pregnancy, pregnancy complications, fetal death, and sex trafficking. So this is a very, very serious issue, an issue that obviously spills over into other areas. A few years ago, I heard about an issue in Baltimore. Mr. Avent may be familiar with it. There was a report in a local press that 0 students among Baltimore's high schools passed a math proficiency. And I was perplexed. I couldn't relate to that. And when I learned about ACEs, I began to understand how that could happen. Because even the statistics that I just shared, beyond that, those of us who have been in the trenches, those of us who have experienced life in the inner city, realize that young children have other type of traumas that may not even make it into the research. You know, they have rodent infestations, they have roach infestations, there's gang violence in their community. They hear gunshots going off all the time. They're being bullied at school. There's a lot of other trauma to add to the trauma that the researchers are cognizant of. So we're going to take all those things into consideration. I'm sure Mr. Avent does. I'm sure you see it up close and personal as we consider how ACEs spills over into all these other areas, affecting our ability to transform the lives of our young people.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think we might have time, gentlemen, for one more topic. I want to mention, bring up the idea of there's voting and there's I'll leave it up to you, gentlemen. There's voting, and then there's also disease and mortality. I'll leave it up to you, gentlemen. Which one we have? I don't think we have time to address both those topics. I'll throw it out to you, gentlemen. Which one can we talk about that we might be able to have some idea of how to redress?
How about voting?
Go ahead, and I'll touch on
Disease and mortality.
Disease and mortality.
Sounds good. That's great. Then we can get both those topics in. Go ahead, Mr. Spivey. Tell us your insight.
Okay, and voting it runs into politics, and it's always been true that voting has been a mechanism to exert power. And whether it was back in before the 14th and 15th Amendment, when black men couldn't vote and they were finally allowed to vote, in the 19th Amendment, women were allowed to vote, but still those voters, even when they were eligible to vote, it was controlled as to who could vote. And in fact, some of the biggest massacres in American history were related to voting, like the Ocoee massacre in 1920, where 2 men tried to vote in Ocoee, Florida, 2 black men, and they ended up killing one of those men. The other man was ran out of town, and they burned out or killed members of the entire community of Ocoee, which is right outside Orlando. And hundreds of people died, although the official death toll said something like 35. And so voting has always been crucial. And now, in the last several years, it happens to be the Republican Party this time, although it was Democrats in the past, that try to control the number of black voters, which ultimately controls who gets elected. And the whole Reconstruction movement, where black people were getting voted to congressional offices and sometimes statewide offices in the South, while that lasted, when it went with a flourish, and that they made sure that black people didn't vote in mass for some period of time to come. And that those efforts are still being made now in almost every state. In this case, the Republican Party is trying to control the number of black voters and trying to control who has power in this country. And if you look back to the Electoral College system and the way we determine our representatives in Congress,
Right.
All that had to do with power too. So I just wanted to get that out there.
I appreciate that very much, Mr. Spivey. Mr. Avent, we have 2 minutes.
Well, we touched on the topic of disease and just our health and well-being. A lot of what we're dealing with as a community goes back to what we're putting in our mouth and what we're doing with our body. We really need to look at the types of diets that we have. We need, as a community, to reduce our sugar intake. Something that I think we need to look at is fasting more. Fasting allows the body to heal. And there's different ways of fasting. You can fast for a day, for 3 days, 7 days. You can do intermittent fasting, where you're not eating for, say, 16 hours a day and eat in between 8-hour window. And in eating that, reduce your sugary food intakes, reduce your alcohol intake. A lot of these things, if you look deeper, a lot of the cancers, heart disease, and everything that we're dealing with has a lot to do with our diet and our lack of exercise. And so we as a people have got to get on the ball. I mean, because really the industry, this processed food industry, was designed to destroy it. It really doesn't make those companies rich. And I think they work together with the pharmaceutical companies to make them rich.
I agree. I really appreciate your info.
Yeah.
We're going to be wrapping it up shortly. Bear with me. Right, we're going to be wrapping up shortly. We have one more comment. I'd like to just share this comment from Mike V. He'd like to know whether White House delegate resources for those Black males who dropped out during the pandemic GED program provide up to $5,000 for technical vocational education. I think that would help a lot to give an alternative education to young people who need transformative education to move away from delinquency. Just want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming on today. It's been a very lively discussion. We've covered a lot in a very short period of time, put a lot of information out for our viewers to contemplate. We also invite our viewers to reach out to Insight News and McFarlane Media. Share some of these ideas. These may be future program topics that we can discuss. That's why we're having the conversation with you. We appreciate everyone tuning in. We appreciate our guests today. And in closing, I just wanted to share an article that I just wrote. I wrote an article about the organized effort by the federal government, unfortunately, over the last 5 or 6 decades to basically sabotage the progress of our young people. J. Edgar Hoover talked about in his COINTEL program the need to eliminate, not arrest, eliminate leaders who could follow in the footsteps of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Stokely Carmichael, i.e. our young men. So there is a lot that's going on that is not apparent to us, but it's apparent in the statistics. It's apparent in the facts. So I'd like to share that. Yasmin, if you could put up the link to that article. It's a 4,300 word article, folks. It is an expose. It dives deep, and it's fully documented with government sourcing. So I'd like you to read that, and I'd like you to follow up. Let us know what you think about that, and we will be glad to address some of your comments and concerns at a later date. We certainly appreciate you. Okay. We're going to wrap it up now. I'd like to, again, invite our viewers to please subscribe, to be able to have these type of conversations. Subscribing and becoming a formal part of our conversation would allow us to know who you are and be able to reach out to you for your input, to be able, as I said, going forward, to be able to incorporate some of your thoughts and ideas into future conversations. So we think that's extremely important. Want to thank everybody. We look forward to seeing you next time on the conversation with Al McFarlane. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate you.